If you've ever struggled with knowing what to say to someone because you don't want to hurt their feelings, then you're going to want to listen to this entire podcast. We talk about way more than that in this episode, but the podcast definitely ends with me getting kind of a mini counseling session of how to handle an issue where I've been ghosting someone in my life, and I know that I need to approach them, but I've been struggling with what to say and how to say it and how to have acceptance that it's what I need to say and compassion about the situation, which is really the context of today's conversation. I'm interviewing Dr. Diana Hill. She is a clinical psychologist, and she is also the author of the ACT Daily Journal, Get Unstuck and Live Fully with Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. She's also created a card deck that goes along with that, and she has an upcoming book that'll be out in a couple of months, May 2024. The Self-Compassion Daily Journal. She is so fantastic. I mean, she's done a ton of research just into how to be more compassionate towards yourself, accepting of your own thought processes and things going on in your life, and how to be mentally flexible and how to move forward. Actually, it's called psychological flexibility. How to have the psychological flexibility to feel the things that you feel right now, but then also act in the values that you want to have. We have a great conversation, especially when it comes to values, and especially when it comes to if you're feeling burnt out in work or relationships or other areas of your life. You don't want to miss this episode. Let's dive in. Dr. Diana Hill, I'm super happy and thrilled to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Now, you're a clinical psychologist. What led you to want to get involved in the clinical psychology world?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky question, because if you ask any psychologist that, they're going to have two different answers, right? They'll have the answer that they'll give their academic advisor or the professional setting, because I want to help people and I care about others. And I was always a good listener. And then there's the real story. And I think for many therapists, psychologists, people that are in this type of profession, the real story comes from their own suffering. People say, research is me search, but I often say, my mess is my message. And I struggled in my own life with, I was anorexic, I was bulimic, I had a long experience with that. But then I also had a strong interest in science and research in combination with an interest in sort of more like soul-centered, acceptance-centered approaches. And I found that combination of being able to discover recovery from a place of sort of like spiritual healing, but also from the science was the sweet spot for me. And I wanted to go on and research that and actually figure out what are the components of that made it work for me so I can help others. So that's my true story. But I would say if you were in a professional setting, I might give you a little bit of a different answer.
A little more polished answer.
Yeah, a little more polished answer.
In a professional setting. So what did you find? I'm assuming that you did your PhD dissertation on something in that realm about compassion or acceptance. And what did you do your research on, and what did you find in your research?
Yeah, my research was a combination of an acceptance-based approach. I was working at CU Boulder in Colorado and Stanford University. And my advisor at Boulder was really interested in something called Aptide Awareness Training. So that was about learning how to listen to your own body, how to develop your interoceptive awareness, which is awareness from the inside out of how to eat, how to take care of yourself. And that was in combination with a researcher at Stanford who was looking at something called dialectical behavior therapy, which is how to relate to your emotions differently, how to be able to accept difficult emotions and still be able to choose the behaviors that are in line with your values. So my research was a combination of those two, appetite awareness training with a dialectical behavior therapy. And then over time, I got more interested in this approach called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which has a lot of work around values and being able to identify what type of life do you want, not just what type of life looks good on the outside, but what is it really deep inside that you want your life to be about, and how do you pursue that? How do you create meaning in your life? How do you let go of other people's expectations and choose what's right for you? And then also accept all of the difficulty, pain, suffering, all of that comes along with that, except that sometimes choosing meaning or choosing your values is the more painful path to take.
Mm. Now, I know very little about ACT. I know actually probably the extent of what I know includes what you just said. And so when it comes to acceptance and commitment therapy, and I've heard great things about it, but is it something that's like dialectical behavior or like cognitive behavioral, where there's a lot of aspects of it that are immediately useful, like things that people can begin doing on their own? Or is it really something that they need to go and find someone who's been trained in ACT in order to go really into that modality?
Well, part of the reason why I wrote the ACT Daily Journal with Debbie Sorensen was that for a long time it was that the only place that you could get ACT was through a trained professional. But a lot of folks don't want to be in therapy, and a lot of people don't need to be in therapy, but would really benefit from some of these tools and processes. And that's why we designed it in a way that made it for folks that, you can do it outside of the therapy room. Sometimes it's helpful to have a coach or guide. Sort of like you can exercise without a personal trainer, or you can exercise with a personal trainer. Either way, you're going to get benefit. You may get a little extra boost by doing it with somebody that specializes in that. Yeah. But with ACT, it is something that you can apply right away. The way that I like to conceptualize it is that it has these 6 core processes that are helpful for anyone that is navigating change. Like, how do you adapt to change when it happens in your life? How do you go for what you want, what you really care about, be the type of person you want to be in the world? How do you deal with all the thoughts that show up along the way that try and sabotage you and may throw you off course? And then also, how do you stay present in it all? And so these 6 core processes of ACT have to do with things like practicing and learning how to get a little space from your thoughts, which is called cognitive diffusion, how to accept whatever is happening in this moment inside of your body without getting rigid and tight around it or swept away by it. So cognitive diffusion, we have acceptance, we have values. What is it that you really care about? Who do you want to be in the world? With ACT, we also talk a lot about perspective taking, because when you're in it, sometimes you can't see clearly. So you need to zoom out a little bit, sort of like be like a airplane in the sky looking down, and you see a clearer view on yourself, perspective taking on yourself, perspective taking on others. The 5th process that we'll work with folks on in ACT has to do with being present. And then the 6th one is about taking committed action, which is really behavioral. So if you're talking about CBT or DBT, these are all behavioral approaches to psychology, that it's not just about thinking about it or wishing for it to be true. It's actually putting one foot in front of the other. Like, how are you going to make that happen? What does it look like? What are the behaviors you're going to be engaging in to be able to pursue the life that you want to build? And those 6 processes are sort of encompass what ACT is. You can learn them one at a time. You can put them all together, but it really is more of a dance than a protocol.
In the workbook or the daily journal that you've created, so does it kind of start where people, like, you're prompting them to think about a certain situation, or what's kind of their beginning? How do you get into working through each of these 6 principles and the person implementing them? Is it by them thinking of a thought or a situation or a dream that they have? How does it begin?
Well, maybe I'll say how I work with people in my therapy room.
Great.
The book is broken down to each of those processes, one process per chapter.
Gotcha.
So you can go through and just learn about that one process, and there's prompts and questions and a little teaching around it. But how I work with people in my therapy room, and how I even work with my own self, is I start and ACT. We start with something called creative hopelessness, which is looking at, if you have a problem in your life, something that you're struggling with, as all of us do. People can think about a problem they have right now. Looking at what you're doing to try and solve that problem that's not working for you. And it's not that you're hopeless, but oftentimes the attempts to solve the problems of our lives are just digging us deeper. We're like, like gardeners stuck in a hole, and we're just digging because the shovel has been the thing that has always worked for us. So might as well just dig harder. Yeah. And what happens with creative hopelessness is that I want people to be able to see that our attempts to solve problems, the way that the human mind attempts to solve problems, it makes a lot of sense, but when you're trying to solve your pain, your grief, your sense of inadequacy in the same way that you're trying to solve a math problem, it's not going to work, because the nature of human problems is that solving them isn't getting rid of them. Solving them is learning how to be with them, how to be with your own insecurity while you still go up and ask that, person or that social anxiety, while you still go ask them a question or show a little bit more vulnerability. It's not that you're ever going to get rid of your vulnerability or get rid of your insecurity. And so looking at the things that are keeping you stuck, and then the creative part in ACT is, could we do something different? And the doing something different are things like, could we practice acceptance here? Could we step back from your thoughts here? Could we identify what really matters to you and pursue that instead of just pursuing whatever, what everybody else wants for you? That's the place that I begin. And then I use the processes as tools to be able to help to find a creative solution, something that they've never thought of or experienced or done before. And that's where freedom can come in.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of at the beginning that it was for you really taking principles and things like this, but then combining them with a spiritual part of it, spiritual practices. What do you mean when you say that? And what of that has worked for you, either for you or for the clients that you work with, and really helping them the most?
Well, spirituality is something that's been, I think, is newer in psychology research, and sort of even just the openness to spirituality. And it's also something that's very personal to each individual. So my personal experience of what I practice in my, has been more from a Buddhist contemplative practice perspective. And for somebody else, it may be a Catholic or Christian perspective or a Jewish perspective, or, there's lots of different, or a non-religious, but connected to nature is their spiritual path. For me, early on, when I was in my 20s, I went to Plum Village Monastery, where Thich Nhat Hanh was teaching, and was able to learn directly from him. And that was a real opening of a door for me around, because I was in such a competitive, high performance kind of one track mind, to be able to get back to the basics of really being present in our lives as they are, that the happiness is here and now. There's no need to hurry. There's no need to rush. It's all just the simple, sort of the simple things of like enjoying my kids with me on the couch, or, having a cup of coffee in the morning. That was really helpful for me. And over time it's evolved. I've gotten much more involved into yoga and to just opening to other perspectives. But I do think spirituality, the nature of spirituality is that your mind is maybe open to something bigger, and also seeing that you're not alone in it. And that can be very helpful, to not feel so alone in your struggles. Yeah.
And maybe that you don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah. That there's a lot that's unknown. Yeah. As well.
Let's talk about that competitive spirit. I've been known to be called competitive, as I'm sure many of my listeners have as well. And we were speaking just a bit before we started the podcast, just about how a lot of times when people are very driven, very ambitious, or very competitive, it can be difficult, not just because they have a lot of drive, but because when other people don't understand it, they may say things like, well, you just need to take a break, or just rest, or just not be so competitive. Which is really difficult. Like, I've found I can't turn that wire off in my brain. I haven't found the switch. Maybe it's somewhere. And you were talking about how you have begun to really look at some new and maybe more appropriate ways to look at that situation and help people who are very driven and competitive do some things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, my interest has been in more recently in a concept called wise effort, which actually is one of the steps on the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. There's a lot of these like ethical principles of Buddhism, things like wise action, wise intention, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. But this term wise effort caught me when I was reading through these principles, because wise effort is about knowing how to put your effort in the right spots, how to dial it up, how to dial it back. And that solution of just don't care so much, which is oftentimes I'll have clients that come in that are really burned out and maybe they're pursuing something, but people are telling them, just don't care so much. Why don't you just, go get a massage, get a pedicure, whatever. They're like, that's not actually solving the issue, because what if I care a lot and I want to be pursuing this thing, but maybe the way I'm going about it isn't working for me. And that's going back to this creative hopelessness idea. It's sort of like a bird that's caught in a kitchen. If you ever had a bird caught in your kitchen, it wants to fly up and out and it hits the window a million times over. And it's sort of like telling a bird to not fly. It's not that you don't want the bird to fly. It's just you need to fly in a different direction. So wise effort, one of the things that I'll have folks do is create a little bit of a diagram where on the x-axis, like a cross, is values. And if you're sitting in the middle, to your right is towards your values and to your left is away from your values. And starting to look at, okay, what am I doing here that I'm putting effort into that's away from my values? And where am I putting effort that's towards my values? And even just making that distinction, you'll start to also see that if you put a line up and down of high effort, low effort, you'll get 4 quadrants. When you're putting effort in places, high effort in places that are away from your values, you get a quadrant of burnout. And that's where I see a lot of people that they're coming to my practice where they're burned out by a certain relationship. They're burned out by certain, jobs, or even just burned out by social media, certain aspects of social media that they're putting a lot of effort into, but it's away from their values. And we want to start to either, with that burnout category, either start to figure out how can I put my values in here so that it makes it worth it, or what do I need to let go of? And that's where acceptance comes in, the acceptance of letting go of something that isn't working for you. Then you also have another quadrant, which is away from things that are away from your values and low effort. And this is where things like procrastination comes in. It's easier to procrastinate. It's easier not to call that person back. It's easier to not go to the event, but it's kind of away from my values, because what if I'm procrastinating on the very thing that I care about? Or what if at that event is somebody that I want to make a connection with? Or what if applying for that job is something that deep down inside I really want for myself? So the low effort away from our values is another place. I call that the not worth it zone. It's another place where I see people really struggling and get really stuck in the cycles of avoidance. So that's one side of the diagram. And then a lot of my work in wise effort is helping people shift from that side to high effort towards values. So that's the bird that's flying up and out, but it's going out a door. And high effort towards values actually feeds energy back to you. When you're engaging in a project that's really meaningful to you, you feel, I just interviewed this woman who studies something called sisu, which is the Finnish art of like perseverance and determination. Like when you get this like upsurge of, whoa, I feel like I can do this right now. You get energy fed back to you by moving towards your values. And then we also have another category, which is low effort and towards your values, which is what is just enjoyable, meaningful, and easy for you. Those are the moments that you savor. And it could be that you're engaging in things that you just have personal strengths in, or in relationships that are really soothing to you, or environments. And those are the 2 places that I call the worth it and the savoring category that I work with people on to help develop more of.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes total sense. When I first wrote down like low effort, but towards the value, I was thinking, well, maybe that one's, I thought that would be a less than, but it's actually kind of more of the pinnacle, maybe, because maybe this is the premise of wise effort. Like something doesn't have to be very effortful in order to get joy from it.
No, not at all. Some things that we can just get joy from. I'm looking outside. I love gardening and gardens and nature. I'm looking at this oak tree that I just like adore, this oak tree, because all these birds come and say, it's zero effort. But actually, when I'm so engrossed in my work, I forget to look out and see the oak tree, right? And we know from the neuroscience of just looking at things in nature, looking up and out, looking at the horizon, it activates more allocentric parts of our brain. That's low effort, but it feeds back to you. And high effort things, if they're in line with your values, will feed energy back to you as well. So the values part is really important, because when you're not engaging with your values, you get depleted and drained, and you can't quite, it's like something's missing here, or the feeling of longing or the feeling of depletion. And when you are engaging with your values, it still can be hard, but maybe you're not drained in the same way. And then you balance that out with the ease. In yoga, that's often what's talked about, is the balance of effort and ease, and the strength and the surrender, that they go hand in hand. And so often we think it's an either or, but it's really a both and.
How can I know what my true values are? Not just maybe what I say they are or what I want them to be, but how can I know what the values are? And do you find that people can get stuck there, where they're saying, well, these are my values, but then it's not aligning with what they're actually wanting to work towards? If it's such a crucial aspect, how do you get that part right?
I think there's two entry points into values, and this is what I see myself as when I'm a psychologist, I'm like a values highlighter. Like my whole job is to beginning of the session, what does this person care about? What is it, and what is getting in the way of them pursuing a life that they care about? So 2 ways to know what your values are. One is what hurts the most for you in your life. What's most painful? Pain is an indicator of values. A really simple thing that people can do is ask themselves, what do you regret? Looking back over your life, what do you regret the most? And Daniel Pink, who did a large survey of over 4,000 people just looking at regrets, the American Regret Survey, found that our regrets tend to fall into 4 categories. We tend to have foundational regrets, which are the little things that built up over time that we didn't do, like not wearing sunscreen. By the time you're in your 30s, you start to see, oh, I regret that, We have connection regrets, those relationships that we let just fall, kind of slip away. Maybe they're like high school friends that you just haven't connected with, or the rifts that you haven't repaired. We have moral regrets, the things that we've done that are against who we want to be. And then we have boldness regrets, the moments that we didn't step up and say something or do something or go for it. And those regrets, when you start to look at those categories of regrets, they actually tell you a lot about what you care about. I don't regret that I didn't go out for like the bowling team. I do not regret that, but I regret some other things that I didn't go out for. And when you identify what your regrets are, then you can start to say, oh, how could I live out that value in the here and now? Not about getting caught in your regrets. So that's one entry point. What's painful to you? What relationships are painful to you? What do you regret? And what does that say about what you care about? Because what is painful to you is it's like on the other side of what's most important to you. The other way you can look at values, which is a more kind of, I don't know, for the positive people that like, oh, I don't want to go to look at my regrets, is what brings you the most vitality. If I were to say, look back over the last 24 hours of your day, when did you feel like you were at your best? When did you show up in the way that you feel proud of? If someone were videotaping you and they're like, oh, that was me, that I feel like that was the full expression of how I want to be in the world. When was that? And when did you feel that uplift of energy and vitality? And that sometimes isn't what you would expect it to be. I went to a yoga class midday with a girlfriend that's like a friend of mine that I just really like. And we had 3 minutes to connect. Like we were going to and from work. And just those 3 minutes were the best part of my day. I'm like, wow, what does that say about what I care about? I care about connecting with friends. How much time are you spending connecting with friends? 3 minutes. Well, maybe you want to spend a little more time in that area, right? So your vitality can tell you a lot about your values as well.
Those are really good. Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking, even as you're saying that, pain is an indicator of values. And so a way to process that is, what do you regret? And man, don't you feel like a lot of people, that's where they spend a lot of their mental energy in, maybe they're not thinking of it as regret, or I'll talk about it as me. Maybe I'm not thinking of it as regret when I'm processing it, but I tend to think back of like, I hate, like there's random thoughts from like high school or 2 weeks ago or yesterday. And it's like, I wish I would have handled that differently. I wish I would have said something different or been. And I don't know that I've ever thought of it in terms of, well, dig deeper and let me see what is it that's the flip side of that shows me what I care about and how I didn't show up authentically in that moment because I wasn't representing what I care about.
Exactly. And so the two steps that are missing are, what does it say about what I care about? And step number 2, which is actually the empowering one, is, and how could I act on that care right here, right now? Let go of the regret. Don't get stuck in the regret, because your head will just circle around and ruminate on that forever. Like that's not useful, or self-berate yourself, or just like flagellate, it's okay. So I care about that. If I care about those 3 minutes with my girlfriend, how am I going to make it 10 minutes with my girlfriend? How am I going to call her up and say, let's do that again next week? Because when you start to take action in your life based on what what your regrets or your vitality are telling you what's important to you, then you start to feel pretty good about your life. That discrepancy that you talked about, the discrepancy between where I am and what I care about, when that gets too big, we either get so depressed that we feel like we can't, there's nothing I can do, or we start to blame ourselves. And neither of those are solutions. Neither of those are outs. Those are all the old patterning that we tend to do, which is ruminate on stuff, blame ourselves, get down on ourselves, or think it's impossible. Yeah. So taking action in the here and now, little tiny actions is where it's at.
I use this example often because this is like a person that I really feel for. So I'm thinking about the single mom who the things she regrets and the things that she feels give her vitality is the time she's able to spend with her kids. But her life circumstances, she feels like, are keeping her from doing that the most that she wants to. Like she has to work, and work, it has to be from these times. And so she's not able to be there to pick her kids up from school or XYZ. And I feel like, that's one example, but we could take that to a lot of people who, like, they realize that there's a misalignment in their daily actions and their values, but they feel kind of stuck or kind of prisoned into something they feel like they don't have control over, that's keeping them from doing those things that give them vitality. So how do you help people begin to understand, like, how to maybe accept some of those things, or, as you kind of just said, do the things that they can do with the time that they have when they feel a lot of maybe shame, maybe regret, maybe, a lot of negative ruminations because of what they feel like they aren't doing?
Okay. So there's a lot of different parts to my answer in that. One is just attending to context. Psychology has long-standing had a problem with blaming the individual and not looking at the context and the way in which the context of people's lives is impacting how they're acting or what they're doing or the choices that they have. As if you had a choice to have more time with your kid. You don't. That's the reality, or the context that you're in is that you only have 30 minutes of the day, right? And does that mean that you're not living out your values, right? No, not at all. Actually, if you start to look at it, that example of a single mom, or just anybody that's pressed for time, we all feel time poverty. I think many of us feel time poverty, and yet what we do is we tend to speed up. The less time that we have, the more hurried we become, and then the less time that we feel like we have because we're skimming the surface of our lives. And so when we have a lot of time poverty, and there was an interesting research study on this where I think it was out of Stanford, where they had seminary students that were told to go give a speech on the Good Samaritan, and half of them were randomly assigned to be late, and half of them were randomly assigned to have enough time. And then on the way to the speech, there was, I think, an unhoused person on the street or somebody that needed help. Those that felt like they did not have enough time, even though they were giving the speech on being a good Samaritan, were less likely to stop and help the person in the street, right? So context matters a lot. And that doesn't mean that we can't live out our values in the context that we're in. So acceptance is one of them. Accepting the reality of the situation and the context that you're in. What can you control? What can't you control is a really important, like some people like say, write a line down the middle of the page, put on the right side what I can control, put on the left side what I can't control. Because if you're trying to control what you can't control, you're going to be miserable. But in the parts that you can control, in that 30 minutes with your child, are you rushing through it, or are you living out the values that you want to be living? Those values are things like, I want to be an engaged parent. I want to be a present parent. I want to be a loving parent. Could you live that to the fullest in those 30 minutes? Even if you're folding the laundry and making dinner. My son came up to me. I had like 10 minutes. I was on a run this morning. I was running too late, and he was going after school, and I was coming back from running, and I was going to get on a call with a client. And I walk in the door thinking, I just got to get showered in and out, 10 minutes. And he comes up to me. He's like, Mom, I have a loose tooth. And I was like, oh, what's most important right now? The shower or the loose tooth? And I was like, loose tooth, because there's not a lot of loose tooth, And so that's values. Making that decision in that split moment. You don't need more time to live out your values. You live out your values in the time that you have. And then the other part of it is the expectations and the inner chatter and the self, I'm not doing enough. I'm not good enough. And we can turn anything into not good enough. We can turn values, and now I'm not living out my values good enough. Right. Yeah. So that's also where compassion and self-compassion come in, which have to do with looking at yourself in the context of your life, in the struggles that you have. You're doing the best that you can. And having a voice in there that is encouraging and kind and wants the best for you and is courageous and brave and on your side. And most of us do not have that voice going on in our head most of the time. So being able to start to cultivate a more compassionate voice within ourselves helps us better live out our values each and every moment of our life. So that would be my answer to that one. Sort of a complex answer to a complex question.
I know. I love it. I love it. So overall in the premise of wise effort, so we've talked about the values that we have, and that being a starting place. And we have the quadrants that we're looking at. Before in our kind of pre-conversation, you said there were two other things though. And I remember one of them was psychological flexibility. I think that's right. And I cannot remember.
It was compassion.
Yes. That was it.
Psychological flexibility and compassion. Yeah, they're the overarching skills that helps you move into the quadrants that you want to be in, because you want to be in the worth it quadrant and you want to be in the savoring quadrant. In order to move from something that's burning you out or something that's not worth it, like how do you get yourself from procrastinating to taking action? It requires psychological flexibility and compassion. So the psychological flexibility part has to do with knowing your values, being willing to feel discomfort in the service of those values. The compassion part has to do with how are you supporting yourself as you make that courageous move? And everybody has something that they don't want to do that they know that probably would be good for them to do right now, whether it's starting a movement exercise program, or it's, calling someone back that they've been, or texting someone back that they've been avoiding, or it's whatever it is. We all have something. You have something, I have something. And it requires that combination of psychological flexibility and compassion to be able to shift us enough to get into that spot of living in a place that's more worth it.
There's, okay, I have an example. I want to help you.
Good.
I want to see if you can help me work through this one. So there's the example that came to mind is I have a friend, and and we don't live close, but this friend, and I wouldn't say that this friend is necessarily in like my closest circle of friends, but we've been more than acquaintances, but they're not like a best friend. And, sometimes when I'm with them, I'm just like kind of drained of like, oh, we've gone on hikes together and things like that. And I have much more, like I have kids and a spouse. And so, and this friend doesn't. And so sometimes it's like, they don't necessarily understand that I have all of these other things. And so it can feel like they're kind of demanding of my time. And so over the past year, I've really distanced myself, and I feel bad. And here's why, because I will just like not respond to text messages because I think I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know what to say back because they're going to want to spend time together, and I have to put my family first. Like, my weekends are now for my family, and I just am unwilling, at least for this relationship, to like invest that time to go and spend with them. So I don't know what to say. And it bothers me because I feel like I should say something. So I feel like there's a compassion side of this, of what I need to say, as well as, I do care about this person and I don't want them to think poorly of me and I don't want to lose the friendship. But my values would say that my first value is my family. But I don't know how to like not people please in this moment. So I just avoid.
Okay, perfect. Good. This is such a good example. Okay. So if we were looking at actually the burnout category or the not worth it category, what I'm hearing in there is part of what you're flip-flopping between is either you're burned out with this friend because you're not spending time with your family. You want to prioritize your family. I would say family is a domain, not necessarily a value.
Okay.
It's how you want to show up in your family because you can't get rid of your family. I mean, but how you want to show up with your family is you want to spend time and be more present with your family.
Yeah.
And so when you're spending time with this friend, which it doesn't really feel like it's giving back to you, it burns you out. But then there's the other category that you're kind of stuck in, which is the not worth it category, which is the putting off and avoiding texting her. Because in some ways it's just easier not to text her, because if you were to text her back or contact her, you'd have to engage in something that's uncomfortable,
right,
which is being honest about what your needs are and being honest about the boundary that you're wanting to set. And you just end up people pleasing, which again is a not worth it. It's easier in the moment to people please, but for all of us that are people pleasers, it bites us every single time down the road. Short term, great. People pleasing works for you short term. 2 weeks out, people pleasing when you have to go meet with her because you were people pleased her.
Exactly.
A bad idea.
You dread it and you don't want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what the human mind does, is we choose the easier short term solution to make the pain go away. And then we're stuck with the longer term discomfort of it. So to move from that side to the right side, which is how could I be engaging more in the worth it activities, being aligned with my values, how I want to be with my family, be direct. I mean, I'm guessing that you also want to be direct with this friend and be a clear communicator. There's probably some things that you would have to be willing to feel to do it. I don't know if it's truly that you don't know what to say, because I actually think you do know what to say.
That's a good call out.
You have a podcast, you're successful at saying a lot of things. It's you don't want to have to feel what you're going to feel in saying what you probably need to say. And that's the acceptance part. Am I willing to feel that in the service of being more aligned with my values and having what I really want in my life? You actually may find that it deepens your relationship with her, because you're not doing this like flip flop between burnout and not worth it. And nobody likes that. She doesn't like it either, honestly. Yeah. It doesn't feel good to her. So what is it that you need? What is it that you actually know that you need to say that's you're not want, and what is it that you're avoiding feeling in saying it?
Yeah. Well, I believe what I need to say is, because she recently texted me for my birthday and I just haven't responded. This was like 2 weeks ago. I just haven't responded because I'm like, because in it, she said like, I know you've been ghosting me. And I'm like, oh crap. I know, I've been ghosting you because I haven't known.
She smells it.
I know. So I know what I should say is something along the lines of.
Hold on. Change it to not should, want to, or need
want to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, are you saying will? What I will say, no, I don't. What I want to say is I appreciate you reaching out and continuing to try and maintain our friendship. I really want to, honestly, I'm pausing because I'm like, is any of this right? But I'm just going to say it, Diana. Yeah. I really am wanting to spend more time with my family on the weekends and in the evenings. And so I have just, should I say that? Should I say like I've been avoiding or anything? Or do I just say that? Like, do I end there? Do I give the reason why? Or do I just set what I'm trying, or do I just set not the boundary? It's not really a boundary, but like the expectation of what I'm trying to do.
Right. Or just telling the truth. Well, it depends. Yeah. If giving the reason why, if the reason why you're giving the reason why is about people pleasing, that's part of the behavior that we're trying to change. Right. But, if giving the reason why is about compassion, those are two, they're like cousins, people pleasing and compassion, but you can get them mixed up with each other. Compassion is just about being kind and being caring.
Yeah.
And, this is a friend of yours. And so, when we set a boundary, we don't want to slap them in the face.
Exactly.
Right. We want to own that this is about me and my values, and where I'm kind of reflecting on how I want to use my time. And it is strapped. And right now I have families are like, and this may change over time. But the reason why could be helpful in having that go down for her. Yeah. In terms of the compassion, and even sometimes even just acknowledging with like, I am so sorry that I've ghosted you.
Yeah.
I can imagine that has felt really bad.
Yeah.
And I apologize.
Really good point.
And I own that. Sure. And I own that. And I also want to change that. And the way that I think it would be best for me to change it is just to be honest with you that I'm really like my time, like I'm strapped for time. And right now I feel like it's really important for me to prioritize my weekends and evenings with my family. Yeah. And I hope that doesn't mean that we can't be friends, but
right.
So that's, the languaging of it is sort of like, what are the values that you want to show in your language? Do you want to show honesty? Do you want to show compassion? Do you want to show, humility? And that's different for everybody in terms of what those values are for them. But if you keep those at the forefront, then it'll help you choose the language, as opposed to languaging. We get back into the cycle of avoidance in our languaging, and people pleasing again. How'd that sneak in?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about earlier, like pain is an indicator of what we value, and a separate situation. But I was thinking about how recently I've had some unfortunate situations where I've had a friend who didn't tell me the truth about something. And even just today, I was thinking like, man, this is really hurt. Like it really hurts that this has happened. And the next question I thought in my head was, Kimberly, are you doing a good job being truthful too? Exactly. And so even as processing, like, what do I say to this person? I am leaning more towards on the side of truth, of course, because that's just a core value that I have, but also because I've recently been hurt by it. And so I'm like, I don't want other people to feel the hurt that I have felt this week, by them thinking that I'm not being truthful. Even if I'm not lying to someone, if there's things that I'm hiding that later come to light that they feel like I was being deceitful with it, or, just didn't give the whole truth, like that, I don't want to happen.
And that is the power. Yeah. And that is the power of perspective taking. Because you were able to zoom out. When I said like an airplane looking over the land, you're able to zoom out and say like, hey, wait, tables turn. When somebody was not truthful to me, how did it feel? Oh, not good. Okay. Then I want to embody that truthfulness for myself. And for some people, honesty is a very, very core central value for them. For other people, it actually really isn't. And that's okay, whatever. But because it was painful for you, it's an indicator of it's a value for you. And that it's that high values, high effort moment of being honest, that we've all had that moment where like, oh gosh, okay, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to be honest here. The freedom that happens. There's that, I think it comes from the Bible, a Christian line, the truth will set you free. It's so true. Like when you're in that moment and you say it and it frees you up, and then you get lifted up with energy. So I would hope that, that if you actually act on that value, oftentimes our mind is a bad predictor of what is going to happen. You may find that something very different happens with this friend than what you expect.
That's very true.
But either way, your side of the street feels good.
Yeah. That's it, isn't it? Doing the best we can with the way that we can show up, and living in line with our values, as you've been talking about, because that's what we can control us. We can't control the other person and how they respond.
No. And then the last part of it is, because if you are honest with her and you set the limit or the boundary or whatever, is also to remember the savoring quadrant of when you do have that time on the weekend with your family, or the time with your kids in the evening, to remember like, I lived out my values and I participated in making this happen, and I'm going to savor this. I'm going to enjoy this, instead of what our mind could do is go into like a little bit of rumination or, what ifs, like actually take it in. And that's also would be nourishing for you and reinforce you to help you do it again in the future.
Yeah. It's wise effort.
Wise effort. Yeah.
When is your book coming out?
That one's not out till 2025, but I have a book in 2024 on self-compassion, which is really a precursor. I see ACT and self-compassion as sort of the foundational skills in order to be able to do the harder, bigger work of wise effort across the important domains of our life.
Yeah. So they're like the Psych 101 and 201 courses before getting to the deeper stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel honored and blessed that we got a sneak peek into that because, I can't wait for the book now. I'm like 2025, that's another year.
I know.
I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Yeah.
But it takes it'll be absolutely worth it by the time it comes out, for sure.
There we go.
For sure. Dr. Hill, thank you so much for your time with me today. I've loved our conversation and thank you for your coaching and guidance through that situation. I'll have to let you know how it unfolds as I'm not one to sit on things. So I'm probably this evening I'll be sending a text message, but I just so appreciate it and the work that you've been doing. And I know that the listeners are going to enjoy listening to our conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with you.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. I love it when people bring in their personal stuff. You never know, like, is this going to be all interview or are you going to be willing to go there? And the fact that you were willing to go there makes me like you even more. And sometimes it feels super vulnerable to share, especially when you're in the position of the host, to share personal stuff. I do that a lot on my podcast, Your Life in Process, where I do these real plays. And half of the time it's me doing a real play on somebody else. And the other half, it's them doing a real play on me. And it's like good therapy. It's like, I don't have to go to a therapist. I'm just getting good stuff.
You're kidding.
Right here and now. So that's awesome.
Isn't that it? I feel I don't, for my podcast, part of me feels like I just get to, it's like me learning thing. It's like continuing to pay for college without having to, well, I am paying because I'm getting my PhD right now, but I'm like the people that I get to talk to and what they teach me and what I learn, like this is amazing. And so I think it's funny how some people, the podcast is great for the listeners as well, but the things that we can get from it just personally by doing it is super rewarding as well.
Right.
Yeah. Very life-giving in that worth it column, I would say. We'll definitely link to all of your books and your YouTube, your Facebook, your Instagram, and your website in the show notes if people are watching or if they're listening. Thank you again for joining me today. Here are my 3 key takeaways from my conversation today with Dr. Diana Hill. Loved the conversation. And actually, my personal biggest takeaway was when she said to me, I have a feeling you do know what to say. You just don't want to say it. Y'all, sometimes you need people in your life who are going to call you out on things. And you know what? She did call me out. And even though this is my first time talking to her, she knew. She's done this before. You can tell she's a clinical psychologist. And that is exactly what I needed to get that flip to switch in my head to say, you know what? Sometimes you do just have to do the hard things and have the hard conversation, but it's for the benefit of the relationship in the future, as well as to the benefit of continuing to live in line with my own values. That's a super important thing. And it goes right in line with the spiritual part of the pies, working on yourself physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. When we don't live in line with our beliefs and values, then we enter into that stage of cognitive dissonance. We enter into that stage of burnout, like she was talking about. And it can be that you're not living in line with your values because you're avoiding having a difficult conversation with a friend that you want to honor, but they don't feel very honored. I've got some work to do this evening, y'all. Maybe it's brought up some things for you too that hopefully is encouraging you to act on them. My other key takeaway was the question of what are my values, and using the 2 questions of what are the things that I regret or what are the things that bring me pain? And then the opposite of what brings me the most vitality. Where do I show up when I feel proud? What did I do when I feel proud about it? What are those things? I'm going to actually take some time to use those as my thinking time questions over the next couple of days, because while there are answers that I could think of super quickly, I believe that these are so important that I want to really let them simmer and go back to them several times over not just the next couple of days, but ideally throughout life, to really help me figure out what are my values. And then the second question and my third key takeaway is am I living in line with them? Living in line with your values isn't just something that you can kind of put on cruise control. It's a constant, intentional focus on looking at the things happening in your life and being proactive and asking yourself, how can I best align with the person I want to be and the values that I have with the situations that life is currently throwing at me? I really enjoyed today's conversation, and I hope you did too. I would love if you would share this podcast and this interview that I had with Dr. Diana Hill with anyone that you think would benefit from it. And as always, if you could leave a review of the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, then it helps us to reach even more people. And I would be grateful for you to do that. Until next week, stay strong.